Good day, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I sure appreciate you guys stopping by. I'm back with another resto-mod tech tip, and today I'm talking about steering boxes versus rack and pinion. So a lot of people want to get rack and pinion into these first gen, second gen, third gen F bodies. Really any muscle car that you can think of, whether it is a GM, a Ford, Mopar, even a lot of the old Japanese stuff may have it. People automatically think rack and pinion is modern. Rack and pinion has that great modern car feel. That's what I want for the best driving experience and the best performance that I can get out of my car. Now, I want to specifically talk about the F bodies here because that's my bread and butter. And while there are rack and pinion kits for these cars, in general, you don't want to put a rack and pinion in specifically a first generation F body. Without going into a lot of detail on the differences between a rack and pinion and a steering box setup, one of the main reasons that you don't really want to put a rack and pinion in a first generation F body is simple packaging. If you take a look at where the steering box is on these first generation F bodies here, and let me move this spark plug wire here, you'll notice the proximity to the headers. And this is going to be true whether you have a Pontiac engine, whether you have a small block Chevy, or even an LS. The big problem that you're going to face in this situation is that the packaging will put the tie rods from the rack and pinion right through those headers. And so what you typically end up having to do is modify your headers or even completely remove and move an entire tube. So that's number one. So that's an expense that people don't necessarily think about, and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of hassle, especially if you want to try and tackle something on a Saturday through Sunday, and we're really hoping to get your car out, that week or the weekend. Additionally, because of these packaging concerns with how they're mounted in the car on the stock subframe, what you end up with is you actually worsen the bump steer that the factory system already has in the car. So any feel in the steering wheel that you may be gaining by going to a rack and pinion system is actually offset by the fact that it causes huge packaging issues, and your actual steering performance and what the car can do may actually reduce from what a steering box will provide you. The question then remains, okay, I have a steering box and maybe I don't want to put a rack and pinion in. How do I improve the steering in my first generation F body? One of the things that you want to realize about these cars is that the steering wasn't as bad as people claim it is when these cars were new. This goes back to these cars being 50, sometimes 60 years old. And what you have is you have old steering boxes, you have old tie rods, both inner and outer, you have old drag links, and you've got worn out ball joints everywhere in the system. And as things wear, that's where you start really developing all that play that you get in the steering wheel at the top. It is true that a rack and pinion is going to have better on-center feel. And that's as you turn off of center on the steering wheel, how quickly it reacts. That's just inherent in the design of the rack and pinion because there's less moving parts, there's less tolerance stack, and so it's far more linear. So how do you address this while keeping a steering box? Well, the first thing that you do is that you make sure that you have a steering box in the vehicle that has either had a recent rebuild or maybe it's a modern variation. And then the next thing you do is you address all of the other components in the system. So you want to do a complete steering rebuild. That means tearing down the drag link, the tie rods, both inner and outer. That also means the ball joints in the control arms as well as the bushings in the control arms. And then you also want to address things like the rag joint and the bearings in the actual steering column. All of these components act together to create tolerance stack, and it makes the driving situation in these older cars kind of miserable if it hasn't been tended to. Now, on Savannah here, I have a replacement box manufactured by the Lares Corporation, and this is a traditional Saginaw 600 style box, but it's been upgraded with a heavier torsion bar valve. And what that does is it increases the amount of effort that you actually have to put into the wheel. Now, one of the reasons that's important is because you don't want to be traveling at a high rate of speed and simply be able to put large inputs into the wheel with a single finger. You want the steering to react in a manner that you actually have to maneuver the vehicle in an intentional manner, and that means not being over-assisted. Now, one other thing that I'd like to mention is the fact that these older cars have positive scrub radius built into the system. And scrub radius, I won't get into that right now, but basically it's an imaginary line. If you draw a line from the upper ball joint to the lower ball joint on that axis, and then intersect it with the center of the contact patch, that gives you either positive, neutral, or negative scrub radius. And this affects how the steering system works. Without going into too much detail, positive scrub radius makes it harder for the system to work. And with a steering box being more robust than a rack and pinion system, it's actually better to continue to use that steering box simply because the system has to work harder. This is also one of the reasons why you continue to see steering boxes in trucks. It's why you continue to see steering boxes in NASCARs and in certain types of race cars. The way that they're designed, the system has a lot of inherent force in it, and a rack and pinion system is simply not as robust as a steering gearbox. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the boxes available. Obviously, this isn't a complete list, but a lot of the go-tos are going to be Lee Steering, Turn 1, AGR, CPP makes some stuff, and then there's also Borgeson and Layers, who does stuff with kind of factory remanufactured stuff, and you get into a little bit cheaper price points. We're talking anywhere from $250 all the way up to well over $1,000. Depending on what you want and what your budget is. Now, as I mentioned, I have a Layers box on this, which replaced the factory variable ratio 14:1 box that had kind of gone south on this car. It had just gotten too worn out and there was too much play in it. It was dangerous to drive. I think I spent right at about $300 is all. This box has a little bit more modern valving. It's completely rebuilt. All of the tolerances are set correctly in it. And then because it's based on a later model, I don't know if you can see this, but you'll see that the rag joint has been replaced. And that's going to be a different size rag joint, which is some of the things that you'll run into if you're looking at swaps like a Grand Cherokee steering box, for instance. That's also a very popular swap. Typically, all you have to do on these is change the rag joint coupler to match what the box requires, and you're good to go. There's not a whole heck of a lot else that has to be done in here. On mine, the steering ratio, they claim it's a 10:1 steering ratio, but I think it's actually probably closer to about a 12:1. But between going to a smaller steering wheel from the factory wheel and going to a quicker ratio with the added effort of the larger torsion bar valve, it's really changed the driving dynamic of the car. This car is far more sure-footed than it ever was with the old box in it. Now, I would be remiss to mention that this does not cover all situations. I'm specifically talking about stock subframe vehicles in this video. So the point that I'd like to make is that if your first generation, second generation, or third generation F-body still has its factory subframe, the rule of thumb is stick with a box and handle everything that you need within the factory style system to take as much play out of it and to create the type of feel and the type of performance that you want. So I hope you guys enjoyed this quick tech tip here. I hope it's been helpful for you. If you have any questions, definitely pop a comment in there. If you like the content, please do think about subscribing. You can also check out my previous video where we talk about tire and wheel sizes for these cars. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you next time. Bye.